Hey everyone, I'm here to help you relax and drift off tonight. If you enjoy using these videos to fall asleep, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more calming content. Share where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know. Now settle into a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's start unwinding together. The coastal village of Windermere was a place of rugged beauty, where the sea met the sky in an endless expanse of blue. The villagers were hardy folk, accustomed to the harsh winds and crashing waves that shaped their lives. They lived in harmony with the sea, drawing their livelihoods from its bounty and respecting its power. But there was one thing about Windermere that set it apart from other coastal towns, a storm that came every year, without fail, on the night of the autumn equinox. The storm was unlike any other. It didn't rage with thunder and lightning, nor did it bring torrential rains or howling winds. Instead, it was eerily quiet, a dense, swirling mist that rolled in from the sea and enveloped the village in a shroud of gray. But what made the storm truly unique was the sound it carried, a soft, haunting whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The whispers were faint, barely audible over the sound of the waves, but they were unmistakable. They spoke in a language no one could understand, a series of murmurs and sighs that sent chills down the spines of those who heard them. But every now and then, amidst the incomprehensible whispers, a name would emerge, a name that was all too familiar to the villagers. It was always the name of someone who had been lost at sea. The villagers called it the Whispering Storm, and they dreaded its arrival. It was said that the storm carried the voices of the dead, those who had perished in the unforgiving waters and never found their way home. The names it whispered were those of the lost, a reminder of the sea's cruel power and the fragility of life. For generations, the villagers had lived with the Whispering Storm, accepting it as a part of their lives. They would gather in their homes on the night of the equinox, locking their doors and windows against the mist, and wait for the storm to pass. But there were always a few who couldn't resist the pull of the whispers, who felt compelled to step outside and listen. And those who did were never the same. One such person was a young woman named Mara. She was new to Windermere, having moved to the village just a few months ago after the death of her father. He had been a fisherman, lost at sea during a sudden squall, and Mara had come to Windermere in search of closure. She had heard stories of the Whispering Storm, but she had dismissed them as superstition. That is, until the night of the equinox. Mara had been staying in a small cottage on the edge of the village, overlooking the sea. She had spent the day exploring the rocky coastline, collecting seashells and watching the waves crash against the cliffs. As the sun set, she noticed a change in the air, a stillness that seemed to press down on her, heavy and foreboding. The villagers had warned her about the storm, but she had brushed off their concerns. She was not one to be frightened by stories. But as the mist rolled in, Mara began to feel uneasy. It crept over the village like a living thing, swallowing the houses and streets in its gray embrace. The air grew cold, and the sound of the waves faded into silence. And then she heard it, the whispers. At first they were faint, barely more than a rustle in the wind. But as she listened, they grew louder, more distinct. They swirled around her, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every direction. She couldn't understand the words, but there was something about them that tugged at her heart, a deep, aching sadness that made her chest tighten. And then, amidst the whispers, she heard a name. Jonathan. It was her father's name. Mara's breath caught in her throat. She stepped out of the cottage, her heart pounding, and followed the sound of the whispers. They led her down to the shore, where the mist was thickest. The sea was calm, its surface like glass, and the air was heavy with the scent of salt and decay. She stood at the water's edge, her feet sinking into the wet sand, and listened. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They swirled around her, a chorus of voices that seemed to beckon her forward. She felt a strange pull, a compulsion to step into the water, to follow the voices wherever they led. But something held her back, a faint, lingering sense of self-preservation. And then she saw it. A figure emerged from the mist, its form faint and translucent. It was a man, his features blurred and indistinct, but Mara recognized him immediately. It was her father. "Mara," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. "I'm here." Tears streamed down Mara's face as she reached out to him. "Dad," she choked out, "I've missed you so much." But as her fingers brushed against his, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving her alone on the shore. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and Mara felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. She turned to run, but the mist closed in around her, trapping her in its suffocating embrace. The whispers became a roar, a deafening cacophony of voices that seemed to pierce her very soul. She fell to her knees, clutching her ears, but the sound was inside her, filling her mind with images of the lost. Men, women, and children, their faces twisted in anguish, their hands reaching out to her. She screamed, but no sound came out. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. The mist lifted, the whispers faded, and the village of Windmere was once again bathed in the soft light of the moon. Mara lay on the shore, her body trembling, her mind reeling from what she had experienced. The villagers found her the next morning, unconscious but alive. They carried her back to the cottage and tended to her wounds, but they knew there was nothing they could do to heal the scars the storm had left on her soul. Mara never spoke of what she had seen, but the villagers could see it in her eyes. The haunted, hollow look of someone who had stared into the abyss and barely escaped. From that day on, Mara avoided the shore. She stayed in her cottage, her curtains drawn, and refused to leave even for the most basic necessities. The villagers tried to help her, but she pushed them away, lost in her own world of grief and fear. And when the next whispering storm came, she locked herself in her cottage and refused to listen. But the storm had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many others. She was no longer the same person she had been before that night. The whispers had taken something from her, something she could never get back. And so, the legend of the whispering storm lived on, a tale of loss and sorrow, of the sea's cruel power and the voices of the dead. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the edge of the world. And though the storm passed, its whispers lingered, a haunting echo in the minds of those who had heard them. The storm that whispers the names of the lost. The town of Black Hollow was a place forgotten by time. Nestled deep within a dense forest, it was a quiet, unremarkable settlement where life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The townsfolk went about their days tending to their farms, running their small businesses and gathering at the local tavern to share stories and laughter. But there was one thing that set Black Hollow apart from other towns, a strange, impenetrable fog that surrounded it. The fog was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It was thick and heavy, a swirling mass of gray that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It clung to the edges of the forest, forming an almost perfect circle around the town. No one knew where it had come from or how long it had been there. It was simply a part of life in Black Hollow, a natural phenomenon that the townsfolk had learned to live with. But there was one rule that everyone in Black Hollow followed without question: never step into the fog. The rule had been passed down through generations, a warning whispered from parent to child. Those who entered the fog never returned. It was said that the fog was alive, a malevolent force that trapped anyone who dared to cross its threshold. Over the years, there had been a few brave or foolish souls who had tried to venture into the fog, either out of curiosity or desperation. None of them had ever been seen again. The townsfolk had their theories, of course. Some believed the fog was a curse, a punishment for some long-forgotten sin committed by the town's founders. Others thought it was a gateway to another world, a place where time and space ceased to exist. But no one knew for sure. The fog remained a mystery, a dark and foreboding presence that loomed over Black Hollow. For the most part, the townsfolk were content to leave the fog alone. They had their lives to live, and as long as they stayed within the boundaries of the town, they were safe. But that all changed one fateful autumn evening. It began with a scream. The sound echoed through the town, piercing the stillness of the night. The townsfolk rushed from their homes, their faces pale with fear. They followed the sound to the edge of the forest, where the fog loomed like a wall. There, standing at the very edge of the fog, was a young woman. Her name was Eliza, and she was the daughter of the town's blacksmith. She was trembling, her eyes wide with terror, and in her arms she cradled a small, lifeless form. It was her younger brother, Thomas. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper as she recounted what had happened. She and Thomas had been playing near the edge of the forest when a ball they had been tossing rolled into the fog. Without thinking, Thomas had run after it, disappearing into the swirling gray mist. Eliza had tried to stop him, but it was too late. She had waited at the edge of the fog, calling his name, but there had been no response. And then, just as she was about to give up hope, Thomas had emerged from the fog, but he was no longer the lively, mischievous boy she had known. He was cold and still, his eyes vacant, his skin pale as death. The townsfolk were horrified. They had always known the fog was dangerous, but this was something else entirely. It was as if the fog had taken Thomas's life, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell. Eliza's father, a burly man with a heart of gold, was overcome with grief and rage. He vowed to destroy the fog, to tear it apart piece by piece until it released whatever it had taken from his son. But the fog was not so easily defeated. The next morning, Eliza's father gathered a group of men from the town and led them to the edge of the forest. Armed with torches and axes, they approached the fog with determination. But as soon as they stepped into the mist, they were swallowed whole. The townsfolk watched in horror as the men disappeared, their cries echoing faintly before being silenced by the fog. Hours passed and there was no sign of the men. The townsfolk began to lose hope, their hearts heavy with despair. But then, just as the sun began to set, the fog began to shift. It swirled and churned as if something were stirring within it. And then, one by one, the men emerged. But they were not the same. Their eyes were hollow, their movements stiff and unnatural. They spoke in voices that were not their own, their words filled with a strange, otherworldly cadence. They spoke of a place beyond the fog, a place of endless darkness and silence. They spoke of a presence that watched them, a being that had taken hold of their minds and refused to let go. The townsfolk were terrified. They tried to help the men, to bring them back to their senses, but it was no use. The men were lost, their souls trapped within the fog. And then, as night fell, the men began to change. Their skin grew pale and translucent, their bodies becoming almost ghost-like. And then, without warning, they vanished, disappearing into the fog once more. The town was thrown into chaos. Families were torn apart, their loved ones lost to the fog. The once thriving community was now a shadow of its former self, its streets empty and silent. The townsfolk lived in constant fear, afraid that the fog would claim them next. But not everyone was willing to give up hope. Among the townsfolk was a young man named Samuel. He was a quiet, thoughtful soul, the kind of person who preferred books and solitude to the company of others. But he had a sharp mind and a curious nature, and he was determined to uncover the truth about the fog. Samuel spent weeks poring over old books and documents, searching for any clue that might explain the fog's origins. He spoke to the town's elders, listening to their stories and legends, and slowly, piece by piece, he began to put together a picture of what the fog might be. According to the legends, the fog had not always been there. It had appeared centuries ago, after a great tragedy had struck the town. The details were vague, but it was said that a group of travelers had come to Black Hollow, seeking refuge from a terrible storm. The townsfolk had welcomed them, offering them food and shelter. But the travelers had brought something with them, a dark and ancient power that had corrupted the land. The fog had appeared soon after, trapping the town within its grasp. Samuel was convinced that the fog was not a natural phenomenon, but a manifestation of this ancient power. He believed that if he could find a way to break the curse, he could free the town from the fog's grip. But he knew it would not be easy. The fog was powerful, and it would not give up its hold without a fight. One night Samuel made a decision. He would enter the fog himself to confront the presence that lurked within it. He knew it was a dangerous plan, but he had no other choice. The town was dying, and if he didn't do something, it would be lost forever. As he stood at the edge of the fog, Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. The mist swirled before him, its movements almost hypnotic. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, disappearing into the gray. The fog was unlike anything Samuel had ever experienced. It was cold and damp, the air thick with an oppressive silence. He could see nothing but the swirling mist, and the only sound was the faint echo of his own footsteps. He walked for what felt like hours, his senses dulled by the fog's oppressive presence. And then he saw it. In the distance, a faint light glimmered through the mist. Samuel moved toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. As he drew closer, the light grew brighter until he could see its source. A small, ancient-looking lantern hanging from a gnarled tree branch. The lantern emitted a soft, golden glow, and as Samuel approached, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. But the calm was short-lived. As soon as Samuel reached for the lantern, the fog around him began to shift. It swirled and churned, forming shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the air. And then, from the depths of the fog, a figure emerged. It was tall and slender, its form shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent light, and its voice was a low, guttural growl. "You should not have come here," it said. Samuel's heart raced, but he stood his ground. "I've come to free my town from your grasp," he said, his voice steady. The figure laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Samuel's spine. "You are brave but foolish. The fog is eternal. It cannot be destroyed." "Maybe not," Samuel replied, "but I can try." With that, he reached out and grabbed the lantern. As soon as his fingers touched it, the fog around him began to dissipate. The figure let out a roar of anger, its form dissolving into the mist. The light from the lantern grew brighter, spreading out in all directions until the fog was nothing more than a memory. Samuel stood alone in the forest, the lantern in his hand. The air was clear, the sky above him filled with stars. He had done it. He had broken the curse. But as he made his way back to the town, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was not truly gone. It lingered at the edges of his mind, a dark and ominous presence. And though the town of Black Hollow was free, Samuel knew that the fog would always be a part of him. The townsfolk celebrated Samuel as a hero, but he knew the truth. The fog was not something that could be defeated so easily. It was a part of the world, a force of nature that could not be controlled. And though it had been banished from Black Hollow, it still existed, waiting for the next town, the next victim. Samuel kept the lantern with him, a reminder of what he had faced. And though he never spoke of it, he knew that one day the fog would return, and when it did, he would be ready. But for now, the town of Black Hollow was safe. The fog was gone, and the townsfolk could live their lives in peace. But deep down, they knew that the fog was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. And so, the legend of the fog lived on, a tale of fear and courage, of loss and redemption. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond the edge of the world. And though the fog was gone, its presence could still be felt, a cold and silent reminder of the power it held. The fog that binds. It was a quiet, unassuming neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's names and the streets were lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and white picket fences. Children played in the yards, dogs barked lazily in the distance, and the occasional hum of a lawnmower filled the air. But there was one thing that didn't quite fit into this idyllic picture: the old swing set at the end of Maple Lane. The swing set had been there for as long as anyone could remember. It stood in the corner of an overgrown lot, its once bright red paint now faded to a rusty brown. The chains that held the swings were corroded, and the seats were cracked and splintered. No one had used it in years, not since the Thompson family moved away and left the property abandoned. Yet every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the neighborhood grew still, the swing set would creak. At first, no one paid much attention to it. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, like the groan of an old tree bending in the wind. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still, the trees unmoving, and yet the swing set would creak back and forth, as if an invisible child were playing on it. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, but it sent chills down the spines of those who heard it. The neighbors began to talk, of course. They gathered on porches and over backyard fences, whispering theories and exchanging uneasy glances. Some said it was just the metal contracting as the temperature dropped at night. Others claimed it was the work of raccoons or stray cats. But deep down, everyone knew those explanations didn't quite fit. The creaking was too deliberate, too purposeful, as if the swing set were alive. One evening, a young boy named Tommy decided to investigate. He was new to the neighborhood, having moved in just a few weeks ago, and he hadn't yet heard the stories about the swing set. All he saw was an old, forgotten playground, and he was curious. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of adventure, he snuck out of his house after dinner and made his way to the lot at the end of Maple Lane. The swing set loomed in the darkness, its silhouette stark against the pale light of the moon. Tommy hesitated for a moment, his courage wavering, but then he heard it, the creak. It was louder up close, more haunting, and it seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. He took a deep breath and stepped closer, shining his flashlight on the swings. To his surprise, one of the swings was moving. It wasn't swaying wildly, just gently rocking back and forth, as if someone had just gotten off it. Tommy's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked around, searching for any sign of life, but the lot was empty. The only sound was the creak of the swing and the distant chirping of crickets. "Hello," Tommy called out, his voice trembling. There was no response. He took another step forward, his flashlight beam scanning the ground. That's when he saw it. A small, weathered teddy bear lying in the grass beneath the swing. Its fur was matted, and one of its eyes was missing, but it looked as though it had been placed there recently. Tommy picked up the teddy bear, his hands shaking. As he did, the creaking stopped. The swing came to a halt, and the lot fell eerily silent. He felt a cold breeze brush against his skin, though the air had been still just moments before. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging him into darkness. Panicked, Tommy dropped the teddy bear and ran. He didn't stop until he reached his house, his heart pounding in his chest. He burst through the front door, startling his parents, who were sitting in the living room. "What's wrong?" his mother asked, her voice filled with concern. Tommy tried to explain, but the words caught in his throat. He simply pointed toward the lot at the end of Maple Lane, his eyes wide with fear. His parents exchanged worried glances, but decided not to press him further. They assumed he had just let his imagination run wild, as children often do. But Tommy couldn't forget what he had seen or what he had felt. Over the next few days, he found himself drawn back to the swing set, even though the memory of that night filled him with dread. He would sit on his porch, staring at the lot, waiting for the creaking to start again. And every evening, without fail, it did. One night, Tommy decided to return to the swing set. He didn't know why. Perhaps he wanted to prove to himself that there was nothing to fear, or maybe he was hoping to find answers. This time, he brought a camera with him, determined to capture whatever was causing the creaking. As he approached the swing set, the creaking grew louder, more insistent. The swing was moving again, but this time it was swinging higher, faster, as if propelled by an unseen force. Tommy raised his camera and began to record, his hands trembling. He focused on the swing, trying to steady his breathing, when suddenly the camera's screen flickered. The image distorted, and for a brief moment, Tommy thought he saw something, a faint, ghostly figure sitting on the swing. He dropped the camera and stumbled backward, his mind racing. The swing set continued to creak, the sound now deafening, and the air around him grew colder. He felt a presence, something unseen but undeniably there, watching him. He turned and ran, not daring to look back. The next morning, Tommy's parents found him sitting on the porch, staring blankly at the lot. He refused to speak, his face pale and drawn. They decided it was time to call the authorities, hoping they could put an end to the mystery once and for all. When the police arrived, they searched the lot but found nothing out of the ordinary. The swing set was just an old rusted piece of playground equipment, and the teddy bear Tommy had mentioned was nowhere to be found. They dismissed the whole thing as a child's overactive imagination and left. But the creaking didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder, more persistent, until it could be heard throughout the entire neighborhood. People began to avoid Maple Lane altogether, and the once bustling street became eerily quiet. The swing set remained, a silent sentinel in the corner of the lot, its chains rusting and its paint peeling. And then, one day it was gone. The swing set had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but an empty patch of dirt. No one saw it being removed, and no one could explain how it had disappeared. The lot remained empty, and the creaking was never heard again. But sometimes on quiet evenings, when the air is still and the moon is high, the neighbors swear they can hear the faint sound of a child's laughter drifting from the lot at the end of Maple Lane. And though they try to ignore it, they can't shake the feeling that the swing set, or whatever haunted it, is still there, waiting. Tommy never spoke of that night again. He moved away from the neighborhood as soon as he was old enough, leaving the memories of the creaking swing set behind. But he kept the camera, though he never watched the footage. It sat in a drawer, untouched, a silent reminder of the night he encountered something he couldn't explain. And so, the story of the creaking swing set became a local legend, passed down from one generation to the next. Some say it was the ghost of a child who had died tragically, forever bound to the swing set they once loved. Others believe it was something darker, a malevolent force that fed on fear, but no one knows for sure. The lot at the end of Maple Lane remains empty to this day, a quiet reminder of the mystery that once haunted the neighborhood. And though the swing set is gone, the memory of its creaking lingers, a ghostly echo in the minds of those who heard it. Perhaps somewhere, the swing set still exists, creaking in the darkness, waiting for the next curious soul to uncover its secrets. Or perhaps it's simply a story, a tale told to frighten children on cold, still nights. But one thing is certain, those who heard the creaking will never forget it, and neither will Tommy. In a quiet, forgotten village nestled deep within a misty valley, there was a legend about a window unlike any other. It was a small, unassuming pane of glass, set into the wall of an abandoned cottage at the edge of the forest. The window was known as the ethereal pane, and it was said to show scenes from forgotten futures. Visions of what could have been, what might have been, and what never was. Those who gazed into its depths would see glimpses of alternate realities, their lives unfolding in ways they could never have imagined. But the window was not without its dangers. It was said that those who looked too closely risked losing themselves to its visions, their minds and souls consumed by the weight of what could have been. The ethereal pain had been passed down through generations, its origins lost to time. It was kept in the village's oldest house, a crumbling structure of stone and ivy that stood at the edge of the forest. The house was inhabited by an elderly woman named Marin, who had been the window's keeper for as long as anyone could remember. Marin rarely spoke of the window, but when she did, her words were filled with a mixture of reverence and warning. "The window is not a toy," she would say. "It shows the future, but the future can be a dangerous thing." The story begins with a young man named Kyle, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. He had grown up hearing tales of the ethereal pain, but he had never seen it for himself. His grandmother, a wise and enigmatic woman, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its beauty and danger. Kale had always been fascinated by the window, but he had never had the courage to seek it out, until now. His return to the village was not by choice. His father, a farmer who had spent his life toiling in the shadow of the forest, had fallen ill with a sickness that no healer could cure. Desperate to save him, Kale's thoughts turned to the window. He had heard stories of its power to reveal hidden truths, and he wondered if it could show him a way to heal his father. One stormy evening, Kyle made his way to Marin's house. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, and the wind carried with it the faint sound of whispers. The house loomed before him, its stone walls covered in ivy and its wooden doors weathered with age. He pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The interior of the house was as grand as it was decayed. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, the floors covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was cold and still, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the cracked windows. Kyle made his way through the house, his footsteps echoing in the silence, until he found Marin. The elderly woman was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace, her eyes sharp and piercing as she studied Kale. "You've come for the window," she said, her voice low and gravelly. Kyle nodded, his heart pounding. "I need to see it. My father, he's dying. I have to know if the window can help him." Marin studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "The window is not what you think. It doesn't just reveal the future, it consumes it. Once you gaze into its depths, there's no going back. Are you prepared to face that?" Kale hesitated, then nodded. "I have to know." Marin led him to a small, dimly lit room in the back of the house. The window sat on a pedestal, its surface gleaming in the flickering light of a single candle. Kyle approached it cautiously, his fingers brushing against the smooth glass. The moment he touched it, he felt a strange sensation, as if something were reaching into him, pulling at his thoughts and memories. He lifted the window, its weight heavy in his hands, and gazed into its depths. The moment he did, the room was filled with whispers, soft, insidious voices that spoke in a language long lost to time. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until Kale could make out words. "Help us," they said, their voices a chorus of sighs and murmurs. "Set us free." Kyle's heart raced. He knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes and focused on the whispers, his mind and soul consumed by their stories. The future unfolded before him like a tapestry, each thread a memory, each memory a life. Over the following days, Kale became obsessed with the window. He gazed into its depths day and night, his mind filled with its haunting echoes. The villagers listened in awe and fear, their faces pale with the weight of the window's power. But Kale didn't care. The future was all that mattered. As he listened to the echoes, he began to notice changes in himself. His hands were stained with ink, his skin pale and translucent. His dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering his name, a window that showed scenes from forgotten futures. One night, as he gazed into the window, he heard the voice. It was soft and insidious, barely audible, but it sent a chill down his spine. "Why do you gaze?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Kyle's heart raced. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the echoes grew louder, more insistent, until they reached a fever pitch. Kyle felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were reaching into him, pulling at his thoughts and memories. He stumbled back, his hands trembling, and reached for the window. But when he touched it, the room erupted in chaos. The walls shook, the air filled with the sound of screams, and the window's surface rippled like water, its echoes distorting into grotesque shapes. Desperate to escape, Kyle began to search the house for answers. He examined every inch of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. The house was empty, save for the window and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then he noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the floorboards. He knelt down and pried the boards apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the window's previous owner, a historian who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The window is alive," he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Kel's heart sank. He knew what he had to do. He sat in the center of the house, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, trying to calm his racing heart. The house seemed to pulse around him, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you gaze?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Cal took a deep breath. "I gaze because I must," he replied, his voice steady. "I gaze because it is a part of me." The house erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the window's surface rippling like water. Cal felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were tearing him apart. But he held his ground, his resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The house was silent, the air still and heavy. Cal opened his eyes and found himself standing in the center of the room, the window in his hands. Its surface was clean, the echoes gone, and its glass shimmered like a pool of water. The window remained in the house, its power dormant once more. Cal left the village, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had experienced. He knew the window was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths, but he also knew that he had faced it, and that was enough. The village was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the window's haunting echoes. And though the window's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the ethereal pain was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown. In the heart of a sprawling ancient city, there stood a clock tower unlike any other. Known as the Kronos Spire, it was a towering structure of weathered stone and intricate ironwork, its face adorned with golden hands that moved with a precision that defied explanation. The clock tower was the city's most iconic landmark, its chimes echoing through the streets at every hour, marking the passage of time with an almost sentient awareness. But the Kronos Spire was more than just a timekeeper. It was a place of mystery and power. It was said that the tower had the ability to turn shadows into reality, transforming the fleeting, intangible darkness into solid living forms. These shadow creatures would roam the city at night, their presence both a wonder and a terror to those who encountered them. The origins of the Kronos spire were lost to time, its creation shrouded in myth and legend. Some said it had been built by a mad inventor who had sought to control time itself. Others believed it was a gift from the gods, a tool to remind mortals of the fleeting nature of existence. Whatever its origins, the tower had become a symbol of the city's duality, a place where beauty and danger coexisted, where the line between reality and illusion blurred. The story begins with a young woman named Lila, who had come to the city seeking a fresh start. She was an artist, her mind filled with visions of beauty and wonder, but her life had been marked by tragedy. Her family had been lost to a fire, their home reduced to ashes, and Lila had spent years wandering, searching for a place where she could rebuild her life. When she arrived in the city and saw the Kronos spire, she felt an immediate connection to it. The tower's grandeur and mystery spoke to her soul, and she knew she had found her new home. Lila rented a small apartment near the tower, its windows offering a perfect view of the golden hands as they moved across the clock face. She spent her days sketching the tower, her hands moving almost of their own accord as she tried to capture its essence on paper. But no matter how many times she drew it, she could never quite capture the feeling it evoked, the sense of timelessness, of power, of something just beyond her understanding. One night, as Lila sat by her window, she noticed something strange. The shadows cast by the tower seemed to move on their own, shifting and writhing like living things. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, but as she watched, the shadows began to take shape. They formed into figures, humanoid but not quite human, their forms fluid and dark. Lila's heart raced as she realized what she was seeing. The legends were true. The Kronos spire could turn shadows into reality. The shadow creatures moved through the streets, their movements graceful and silent. Lila watched in awe as they interacted with the city, their presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. She felt a strange pull, a desire to understand them, to capture their essence in her art. The next morning, Lila ventured into the city, her sketchbook in hand. She asked the locals about the shadow creatures, but they either avoided her questions or dismissed them as mere superstition. It was as if the city had collectively agreed to ignore the tower's power, to pretend that the shadows were nothing more than tricks of the light. But Lila couldn't ignore them. She spent her nights watching the shadows, her days sketching what she saw. The more she observed, the more she began to notice patterns. The shadow creatures were not random. They seemed to reflect the emotions and memories of the city's inhabitants. A shadow shaped like a child might appear near a grieving mother, while a shadow in the form of a soldier might linger near a war memorial. The tower was not just turning shadows into reality, it was giving form to the city's collective consciousness. As Lila delved deeper into the mystery of the Kronos spire, she began to experience strange phenomena. Her sketches would come to life, the lines on the paper shifting and moving, as if they had a will of their own. She would hear whispers in the night, voices that spoke of forgotten memories and hidden truths. And sometimes when she looked in the mirror, she would see not her own reflection, but a shadowy figure staring back at her. One night, as Lila sat by her window, she heard a voice, a soft, insidious whisper that seemed to come from the tower itself. "Why do you watch?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Lila's heart raced. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the shadows outside her window began to converge, forming a single figure. A woman, her form fluid and dark, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure stepped into Lila's apartment, her movements graceful and silent. "You have seen the truth," the shadow woman said, her voice echoing in the small room. "The tower's power is not just to create, but to reveal. It shows us what we fear, what we desire, what we have lost. Lila's mind raced with questions. Why? What does it want? The shadow woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. The tower is a mirror, a reflection of the city's soul. It shows us what we cannot see, what we refuse to acknowledge. But its power comes with a price. The more you see, the more you risk losing yourself to the shadows. Over the following weeks, Lila became obsessed with the tower and its shadows. She spent her nights wandering the city, her sketchbook in hand, capturing the shadow creatures in her art. But as she delved deeper, she began to notice changes in herself. Her hands were stained with ink, her skin pale and translucent. Her dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering her name, a tower that turned shadows into reality. One night, as she wandered the streets, she heard the voice again. "Why do you seek the truth?" it asked, its tone filled with malice. Lila's heart raced. "I seek the truth because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I seek the truth because it is a part of me." The shadows converged, their forms shifting and writhing as if alive. Lila felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. She stumbled back, her hands trembling, and reached for her sketchbook. But when she opened it, the pages were blank, the lines and shapes she had drawn gone without a trace. Desperate to escape, Lila began to search the city for answers. She examined every inch of the streets, the buildings, the tower itself, but found nothing. The city was empty, save for the shadows and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then she noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the tower's foundation. She knelt down and pried the stones apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the tower's previous keeper, a man who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The tower is alive," he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Lila's heart sank. She knew what she had to do. She sat in the center of the tower, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, trying to calm her racing heart. The tower seemed to pulse around her, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you seek the truth?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Lila took a deep breath. "I seek the truth because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I seek the truth because it is a part of me." The tower erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the shadows converging into a single, massive form. Lila felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were tearing her apart. But she held her ground, her resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The tower was silent, the air still and heavy. Lila opened her eyes and found herself standing in the center of the room, the journal in her hands. Its surface was clean, the shadows gone, and its pages shimmered like a pool of water. The tower remained in the city, its power dormant once more. Lila left the city, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had experienced. She knew the tower was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths. But she also knew that she had faced it, and that was enough. The city was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the tower's haunting shadows. And though the tower's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the Chronos Spire was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. and the courage it takes to confront the unknown. In a remote coastal region where jagged cliffs met the endless expanse of the sea, there lay a town unlike any other. Its name was Marisora, and it was a place of breathtaking beauty and haunting mystery. By day, Marisora was a bustling fishing village, its streets alive with the sounds of laughter, trade, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first light of dawn approached, the town underwent a transformation. The tide would rise, not just to the edges of the town, but over it, swallowing it whole. By dawn, Marisora would be submerged, its buildings, streets, and people resting beneath the ocean's surface as if in a deep, enchanted slumber. When the tide receded at dusk, the town would emerge once more, untouched by the water, its inhabitants unaware of their nightly submersion. The phenomenon had been occurring for as long as anyone could remember. The townsfolk of Marisora accepted it as a natural part of their lives, though they rarely spoke of it to outsiders. They believed the town was blessed, or perhaps cursed, by the sea gods, who demanded their nightly tribute. The ocean was both their provider and their captor, a force of life and mystery that they revered and feared in equal measure. Visitors to Marisora were rare, for the town's secret was closely guarded. But those who did stumble upon it often left with more questions than answers, their minds haunted by the sight of a town that slept beneath the waves. The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had come to Marisora seeking refuge. She was a wanderer, a woman with no home and no ties, her past shrouded in mystery. Alara had heard whispers of Marisora during her travels, a town that disappeared at dawn, a place where the sea and land were one. Intrigued and desperate for a place to rest, she made her way to the coast, following the faint scent of salt and the distant cries of gulls. When she arrived, the town was as vibrant as any other seaside village. Fishermen mended their nets, children played in the streets, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh bread and smoked fish. Alara was welcomed with cautious smiles, the townsfolk eyeing her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She found lodging at a small inn, run by an elderly couple, who warned her to stay indoors after sunset. "The sea claims us at dawn," the old man said, his voice low and gravelly. "It's not a sight for outsiders." Alara nodded, though her curiosity burned brighter than ever. She had always been drawn to the unknown, and the mystery of Marisora was too compelling to ignore. That night, Alara waited until the inn was silent, then slipped out into the streets. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the town. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the sound of the waves was louder than ever. Alara made her way to the edge of the town, where the cliffs met the sea. She watched as the tide began to rise, its dark waters creeping up the shore. At first, it seemed like an ordinary high tide, but as the hours passed, the water continued to rise, flowing into the streets and pooling around the buildings. Alara's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The town was being swallowed by the sea. She ran back to the inn, her footsteps splashing in the rising water. By the time she reached her room, the water was up to her ankles. She climbed onto the bed, her heart pounding, and watched as the water continued to rise. The townsfolk were nowhere to be seen, their homes silent and dark. As the first light of dawn approached, the water reached the ceiling. Alara took a deep breath and closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But when the water enveloped her, she felt no fear. Instead, she felt a strange sense of peace, as if she were being cradled by the sea. When Alara opened her eyes, she was no longer in the inn. She was standing on the ocean floor, surrounded by the submerged town. The buildings were intact, their surfaces covered in seaweed and coral. Fish swam through the streets, and the water was filled with the soft glow of bioluminescent creatures. The townsfolk were there too, their bodies floating gently as if in a deep sleep. Alara moved through the town, her footsteps silent in the water. She felt no need to breathe, no fear of drowning. It was as if the sea had accepted her, made her a part of its world. As she explored, she noticed something strange. The town was not just submerged, it was alive. The buildings seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic light, and the water was filled with the sound of distant singing. Ilara followed the sound, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She found the source of the singing in the center of the town, a massive, ancient tree, its branches reaching up toward the surface. The tree was covered in glowing moss, and its roots were entwined with the foundations of the buildings. At its base was a figure, a woman, her hair flowing like seaweed, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Welcome, wanderer," the woman said, her voice echoing in the water. "You have found the heart of Marasora." Ilara's heart raced. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. The woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I am the spirit of the sea, the guardian of this town. Marasora is my creation, a place where the land and sea are one. Each night, the town returns to me, its people resting beneath the waves. It is a gift and a curse." Ilara's mind raced with questions. "Why do you do this? What do you want from them?" The spirit's expression grew somber. "The sea gives life, but it also takes it. The people of Marasora have always lived by the sea, and they have always paid its price. This is their tribute, a nightly reminder of the power of the ocean and the bond they share with it." Ilara spent what felt like hours talking to the spirit, learning the secrets of Marasora and the sea. But as the sun began to rise, the spirit warned her that it was time to go. "The town will awaken soon," she said. "You must return to the surface, or you will be trapped here forever." Ilara nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of leaving. She had found a sense of peace in the submerged town, a connection to something greater than herself. As she made her way back to the inn, the water began to recede. The town emerged from the sea, its buildings and streets untouched by the water. The townsfolk awoke, their memories of the night erased, and the day began anew. Ilara stayed in Marasora for many months, her curiosity and love for the town growing with each passing day. She became a part of the community, her wanderer's heart finally finding a place to rest. But she never forgot what she had seen beneath the waves, and she often returned to the cliffs at night, watching as the town was swallowed by the sea. The spirit of the sea visited her in her dreams, their conversations filled with wisdom and mystery. Ilara knew that she would never fully understand the secrets of Marasora, but she was content to be a part of its story. The town of Marasora remained a place of wonder and mystery, its nightly submersion a testament to the power of the sea and the bond between land and water. And though its secrets were closely guarded, its legacy endured, a reminder of the beauty and danger of the ocean and the enduring spirit of those who live by its grace. For in the end, Marasora was not just a town, but a living, breathing testament to the mysteries of the world and the courage it takes to embrace them. In the heart of the bustling city of Eldridge, nestled between an old bookstore and a forgotten antique shop, stood a peculiar building. It was an unassuming structure, its facade weathered by time, with peeling paint and a creaky wooden sign that simply read, "The Velvet Door." The building had been there for as long as anyone could remember, but no one ever seemed to enter or leave. It was as if the place existed in a state of perpetual limbo, ignored by the world around it. But to those who paid attention, there was something undeniably strange about the Velvet Door. The windows were always dark, no matter the time of day, and the air around it seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. People who walked past it often reported feeling a sudden chill, or the sensation of being watched, even though the building appeared to be empty. The truth about the Velvet Door was far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. It was not a shop nor a home, nor anything so mundane. It was a doorway, a portal to the nightmares of others. The first person to discover the truth was a young woman named Clara. She had moved to Eldridge a few months prior, seeking a fresh start after a painful breakup. One rainy evening, as she hurried home from work, she noticed the door of the velvet door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed it open, stepping inside. The interior was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were covered in deep red velvet, giving the space a warm, almost suffocating atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something metallic, like blood. In the center of the room stood a single ornate door. It was carved with intricate patterns, swirling vines and grotesque faces that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them too long. Clara hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She felt a strange pull, as if the door were calling to her. Against her better judgment, she turned the knob and stepped through. The world around her shifted instantly. She was no longer in the velvet-lined room, but in a dark, crumbling hallway. The walls were damp, the air thick with the stench of decay. She could hear faint whispers, the sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. Her heart raced as she realized she was not alone. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man with hollow eyes and a twisted, grotesque smile. He reached out to her, his fingers long and bony, and Clara screamed. She turned and ran, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in around her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar in her ears. Just as she felt she could take no more, she stumbled and fell, and found herself back in the velvet-lined room, gasping for breath. The ornate door was closed, as if nothing had happened, but Clara knew better. She had seen something real, something terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Clara couldn't shake the memory of what she had experienced. She tried to convince herself it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress. But deep down, she knew it was real, and she couldn't resist the urge to go back. The second time she entered the velvet door, she was more prepared, or so she thought. This time, the ornate door led her to a different nightmare. She found herself in a vast empty field under a blood-red sky. The ground was littered with broken toys, their faces cracked and twisted into expressions of agony. In the distance, she saw a child, a little girl with matted hair and a tattered dress. The girl turned to Clara, her eyes black and empty, and began to scream. Clara ran, but the field seemed to go on forever. The screams followed her, growing louder and more desperate, until she thought her ears would bleed. Just as she felt she was about to collapse, she was back in the velvet-lined room, trembling and drenched in sweat. Clara's experiences with the velvet door became an obsession. She returned again and again, each time stepping through the ornate door and into a new nightmare. She saw things that defied explanation: a city made of flesh, a forest where the trees whispered secrets, a labyrinth filled with mirrors that showed her twisted versions of herself. Each nightmare was more horrifying than the last, but Clara couldn't stop. She was drawn to the door, compelled to uncover its secrets. It wasn't until her fifth visit that she realized the truth. The nightmares she was experiencing weren't her own. They belonged to someone else. She discovered this when she found herself in a nightmare that felt eerily familiar. It was a small, dimly lit room with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering light bulb. In the corner sat a man, his face buried in his hands. Clara recognized him. It was her ex-boyfriend, Daniel. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding. "Daniel?" she whispered. He looked up, his eyes filled with terror. "Clara, how are you here? This is my dream, my nightmare." Clara's mind raced. She realized that the velvet door wasn't just a portal to random nightmares. It was a gateway into the nightmares of others. Each time she stepped through the door, she was entering someone else's darkest fears. As Clara delved deeper into the mysteries of the velvet door, she began to uncover its history. She learned that the building had been constructed over a century ago by a man named Elias Blackwood, a reclusive inventor who had been obsessed with the nature of dreams. Blackwood had created the doorway as a way to explore the human psyche, to understand the fears that haunted people in their sleep. But something had gone wrong. The doorway had become a conduit for nightmares, a place where the fears of the living and the dead intertwined. Clara also discovered that the velvet door was not without its dangers. Those who entered the nightmares of others risked losing themselves, their minds fractured by the horrors they witnessed. Some who had entered the doorway had never returned, their souls trapped in the nightmares forever. Despite the risks, Clara couldn't stop. She was determined to understand the doorway, to uncover its secrets and perhaps even find a way to close it. But the more she explored, the more she realized that the velvet door was not just a portal. It was alive. It fed on fear, growing stronger with every nightmare it consumed, and it had its sights set on Clara. One night, Clara entered the velvet door for what she vowed would be the last time. She stepped through the ornate door and found herself in a nightmare unlike any she had experienced before. It was her own. She was back in her childhood home, but it was twisted and distorted, the walls oozing black sludge. The air was thick with the scent of rot, and the floor was littered with broken mirrors. In the center of the room stood a figure, a version of herself, but with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure said, its voice a chilling echo of Clara's own. Clara tried to run, but the walls closed in around her, the mirrors reflecting endless versions of herself, each more grotesque than the last. The figure advanced, its hands reaching for her, and Clara realized with horror that she was trapped in her own nightmare. Just as the figure's fingers closed around her throat, Clara woke up, or so she thought. She was back in the velvet-lined room, but something was different. The air was colder, the walls darker. The ornate door was gone, replaced by a mirror. And in the reflection, Clara saw not herself, but the hollow-eyed version of her that had haunted her nightmare. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had never truly left the nightmare. The velvet door had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many others. She was trapped, her soul bound to the doorway, forced to wander the nightmares of others for eternity. The velvet door still stands in the heart of Eldridge, its secrets hidden behind a facade of normalcy. Those who pass by it feel a chill, a sense of unease, but few dare to enter. And for those who do, the doorway offers a glimpse into the darkest corners of the human mind, a journey into the nightmares of others, from which there is no escape. Clara's story is just one of many. The velvet door continues to lure the curious, the desperate, and the brave, feeding on their fears and trapping their souls. It is a place where reality and nightmare collide, a doorway that leads not to another world, but to the horrors that lie within us all. And so, the legend of the velvet door lives on, a cautionary tale for those who dare to seek the unknown. For once you step through the doorway, there is no turning back. You become a part of the nightmare, forever lost in the labyrinth of fear, the doorway that leads into someone else's nightmare. In a secluded village nestled deep within a misty valley, there was a legend about a mirror unlike any other. It was an ancient, ornate mirror, its frame carved with intricate patterns of twisting vines and strange symbols. The glass was dark and smoky, reflecting not the world as it was, but as it could be, or perhaps as it should be. The mirror was said to distort the truth, showing those who gazed into it visions of their deepest desires, their greatest fears, and the hidden truths they dared not face. It was a place of mystery and madness, a relic of a time when magic still walked the earth. The mirror, known as the Shroud of Veritas, was kept in the village's oldest temple, a crumbling structure of a stone and ivy that stood at the edge of the forest. It was guarded by a solitary priestess, an elderly woman named Serene, who had dedicated her life to understanding the mirror's power. The villagers revered the mirror, but they also feared it. For while its reflections could reveal great truths, they could also distort reality, twisting the mind and soul of those who gazed too long into its depths. The story begins with a young woman named Lyra, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. She had grown up hearing tales of the Shroud of Veritas, but she had never seen it for herself. Her grandmother, a wise and enigmatic woman, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its beauty and danger. Lyra had always been fascinated by the mirror, but she had never had the courage to seek it out, until now. Her return to the village was not by choice. Her father, a farmer who had spent his life toiling in the shadow of the temple, had fallen ill with a sickness that no healer could cure. Desperate to save him, Lyra's thoughts turned to the mirror. She had heard stories of its power to reveal hidden truths, and she wondered if it could show her a way to heal her father. One stormy evening, Lyra made her way to the temple. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, and the wind carried with it the faint sound of whispers. The temple loomed before her, its stone walls covered in ivy, and its wooden doors weathered with age. She pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The interior of the temple was as grand as it was decayed. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, the floors covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was cold and still, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the cracked windows. Lyra made her way through the temple, her footsteps echoing in the silence, until she found the mirror. It was even more imposing than she had imagined, a towering structure of dark glass and twisted metal. The frame was carved with intricate patterns, their shapes shifting and writhing as if alive. The glass was dark and smoky, its surface reflecting not the room, but a swirling void of light and shadow. Lyra approached the mirror cautiously, her heart pounding. As she drew closer, she saw her reflection, but it was not the reflection she knew. This version of her was older, her face lined with sorrow, her eyes filled with a darkness that made her stomach churn. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth surface, and the mirror's surface rippled like water. The moment she touched the mirror, the world around her dissolved, replaced by a swirling void of light and shadow. Lyra felt herself being pulled forward, as if by an unseen force, until she was standing in a place she did not recognize. It was a winter landscape, but unlike any she had ever seen. The snow was a deep, crystalline blue, and the sky was filled with swirling auroras. In the distance, she saw a figure, a young boy, no older than her brother, standing alone in the snow. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Lyra," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm scared." Lyra's heart ached. She knew this was her brother, but it was also a part of herself, a reflection of her fears, her doubts, her regrets. She approached him cautiously, her hands trembling. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm here." The boy smiled, his expression filled with relief, and then he was gone, dissolving into the snow. The vision faded, and Lyra was back in the temple, the mirror's surface rippling softly. Selene stepped forward, her expression grim. "The mirror has shown you a truth," she said, "but know this, its reflections are not always what they seem. The mirror distorts the truth, twisting it to fit the desires and fears of those who gaze into it. Are you prepared to face what it might show you?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "I have to know." Over the following days, Lyra became obsessed with the mirror. She gazed into it day and night, her mind filled with its haunting reflections. The villagers listened in awe and fear, their faces pale with the weight of the mirror's power. But Lyra didn't care. The truth was all that mattered. As she gazed into the mirror, she began to notice changes in herself. Her hands were stained with ink, her skin pale and translucent. Her dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering her name, a mirror that distorted the truth. One night, as she gazed into the mirror, she heard the voice. It was soft and insidious, barely audible, but it sent a chill down her spine. "Why do you seek the truth?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Lyra's heart raced. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the mirror's surface began to change. The reflections shifted, the images twisting and writhing as if alive. Lyra felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. She stumbled back, her hands trembling, and reached for the mirror. But when she touched it, the room erupted in chaos. The walls shook, the air filled with the sound of screams, and the mirror's surface rippled like water, its reflections distorting into grotesque shapes. Desperate to escape, Lyra began to search the temple for answers. She examined every inch of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. The temple was empty, save for the mirror and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then she noticed something. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the floorboards. She knelt down and pried the boards apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the mirror's previous owner, a priestess who had been driven mad by its power. Her notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The mirror is alive," she had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Lyra's heart sank. She knew what she had to do. She sat in the center of the temple, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, trying to calm her racing heart. The temple seemed to pulse around her, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you seek the truth?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Lyra took a deep breath. "I seek the truth because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I seek the truth because it is a part of me." The temple erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the mirror's surface rippling like water. Lyra felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were tearing her apart. But she held her ground, her resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The temple was silent, the air still and heavy. Lyra opened her eyes and found herself standing in the center of the room, the mirror in her hands. Its surface was clean, the distortions gone, and its glass shimmered like a pool of water. The mirror remained in the temple, its power dormant once more. Lyra left the village, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had experienced. She knew the mirror was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths. But she also knew that she had faced it, and that was enough. The village was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the mirror's haunting reflections. And though the mirror's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured. A reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the mirror was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown. In the heart of a bustling city, hidden down a narrow cobblestone alley, there stood a theater unlike any other. Its marquee glowed with an eerie, flickering light, and its doors were always open, inviting passers-by to step inside. The theater was known as the Eclipsed Stage, and it was a place of mystery and wonder. Its performances were said to be unparalleled, each show a masterpiece of drama, music, and spectacle. But there was a catch. Those who entered the theater to watch a performance never left. After the final curtain fell, the audience would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only their empty seats and the lingering echo of applause. The Eclipsed Stage had been a part of the city's folklore for as long as anyone could remember. Some said it was a gateway to another world, a place where the boundaries between reality and fantasy blurred. Others believed it was a trap, a lure designed to ensnare the curious and the desperate. But no one could deny its allure. The theater's performances were legendary, and its actors were said to be otherworldly, their talent unmatched by any mortal. Yet despite its fame, the theater remained shrouded in mystery, its secrets known only to those who had entered its doors and never returned. The story begins with a young playwright named Julian, who had come to the city seeking inspiration. He was a rising star in the world of theater, his works praised for their depth and originality. But Julian had grown restless, his creativity stifled by the demands of fame and fortune. When he heard of the Eclipsed Stage, he knew he had to see it for himself. The theater's legend was too compelling to ignore, and Julian was drawn to the unknown like a moth to a flame. One stormy evening, Julian made his way to the theater. The alley was dark and narrow, the cobblestones slick with rain. The theater's marquee glowed faintly in the gloom, its light casting long shadows on the walls. Julian pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. The interior of the theater was as grand as it was eerie. The walls were lined with velvet curtains, the floors covered in plush carpet. The air was thick with the scent of incense and old wood, and the only light came from the flickering chandeliers overhead. Julian made his way to the auditorium, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The seats were empty, the stage dark and silent. As Julian took his seat, the lights dimmed and the curtain rose. The performance began, and Julian was immediately captivated. The actors were flawless, their movements precise, and their voices hauntingly beautiful. The story unfolded like a dream, each scene more mesmerizing than the last. Julian felt himself being drawn into the world of the play, his mind and soul consumed by its beauty. When the final curtain fell, the audience erupted in applause. Julian clapped along with them, his heart filled with awe and admiration. But as the lights came up, he noticed something strange. The seats around him were empty, the audience gone without a trace. The theater was silent, the air heavy with the weight of their absence. Julian's heart raced. He stood and made his way to the stage, his footsteps echoing in the empty auditorium. The actors were gone, the set dismantled, and the stage dark and silent. It was as if the performance had never happened. Desperate for answers, Julian searched the theater, his mind racing with questions. He found nothing, no sign of the actors, no trace of the audience. The theater was empty, its secrets locked away behind its velvet curtains and flickering lights. Over the following days, Julian became obsessed with the theater. He returned night after night, each performance more mesmerizing than the last. But each time, the audience vanished, leaving behind only their empty seats and the lingering echo of applause. As he watched the performances, Julian began to notice changes in himself. His hands were stained with ink, his skin pale and translucent. His dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images, a figure standing in the corner of the stage, a voice whispering his name, a theater where the audience disappeared after the show. One night, as he watched the performance, he heard the voice. It was soft and insidious, barely audible, but it sent a chill down his spine. "Why do you watch?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Julian's heart raced. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the stage began to change. The set shifted, the actors' movements becoming more fluid and unnatural. Julian felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were reaching into him, pulling at his thoughts and memories. He stumbled back, his hands trembling, and reached for the stage. But when he touched it, the theater erupted in chaos. The walls shook, the air filled with the sound of screams, and the stage's surface rippled like water, its reflections distorting into grotesque shapes. Desperate to escape, Julian began to search the theater for answers. He examined every inch of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. The theater was empty, save for the stage and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then he noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the floorboards. He knelt down and pried the boards apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the theater's previous owner, a playwright who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The theater is alive," he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Julian's heart sank. He knew what he had to do. He sat in the center of the theater, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. He closed his eyes and focused on his breathing, trying to calm his racing heart. The theater seemed to pulse around him, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you watch?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Julian took a deep breath. "I watch because I must," he replied, his voice steady. "I watch because it is a part of me." The theater erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the stage's surface rippling like water. Julian felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something were tearing him apart, but he held his ground, his resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The theater was silent, the air still and heavy. Julian opened his eyes and found himself standing in the center of the stage, the journal in his hands. Its surface was clean, the distortions gone, and its pages shimmered like a pool of water. The theater remained in the city, its power dormant once more. Julian left the theater, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had experienced. He knew the theater was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths. But he also knew that he had faced it, and that was enough. The city was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the theater's haunting performances. And though the theater's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the theater was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown. In a quiet, forgotten village nestled deep within a misty valley, there existed a legend about a box unlike any other. It was a small, unassuming object, made of dark, polished wood and fitted with a tarnished brass latch. The box was known as the Echo Vault, and it was said to hold the power to trap echoes of the past, voices, memories, and moments long gone, preserved within its confines like treasures in a reliquary. Those who opened the box would hear the whispers of those who had come before, their stories unfolding like threads in a tapestry. But the box was not without its dangers. It was said that those who listened too closely to the echoes risked losing themselves to the past, their minds and souls consumed by the weight of forgotten memories. The Echo Vault had been passed down through generations, its origins lost to time. It was kept in the village's oldest house, a crumbling structure of stone and ivy that stood at the edge of the forest. The house was inhabited by an elderly woman named Marin, who had been the box's keeper for as long as anyone could remember. Marin rarely spoke of the box, but when she did, her words were filled with a mixture of reverence and warning. "The box is not a toy," she would say. "It holds the past, but the past can be a dangerous thing." The story begins with a young woman named Alara, who had returned to the village after years of living in the city. She had grown up hearing tales of the Echo Vault, but she had never seen it for herself. Her grandmother, a wise and enigmatic woman, had often spoken of it, her words painting vivid pictures of its beauty and danger. Alara had always been fascinated by the box, but she had never had the courage to seek it out until now. Her return to the village was not by choice. Her father, a farmer who had spent his life toiling in the shadow of the forest, had fallen ill with a sickness that no healer could cure. Desperate to save him, Ilara's thoughts turned to the box. She had heard stories of its power to reveal hidden truths, and she wondered if it could show her a way to heal her father. One stormy evening, Ilara made her way to Marin's house. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, and the wind carried with it the faint sound of whispers. The house loomed before her, its stone walls covered in ivy, and its wooden doors weathered with age. She pushed open the creaking doors and stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The interior of the house was as grand as it was decayed. The walls were lined with faded tapestries, the floors covered in a thick layer of dust. The air was cold and still, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the cracked windows. Ilara made her way through the house, her footsteps echoing in the silence, till she found Marin. The elderly woman was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace, her eyes sharp and piercing as she studied Ilara. "You've come for the box," she said, her voice low and gravelly. Ilara nodded, her heart pounding. "I need to see it. My father, he's dying. I have to know if the box can help him." Marin studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "The box is not what you think. It doesn't just reveal the past, it consumes it. Once you open it, there's no going back. Are you prepared to face that?" Ilara hesitated, then nodded. "I have to know." Marin led her to a small, dimly lit room in the back of the house. The box sat on a pedestal, its surface gleaming in the flickering light of a single candle. Ilara approached it cautiously, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood. The moment she touched it, she felt a strange sensation, as if something were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. She lifted the box, its weight heavy in her hands, and opened the latch. The moment she did, the room was filled with whispers, soft, insidious voices that spoke in a language long lost to time. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until Ilara could make out words. "Help us," they said, their voices a chorus of sighs and murmurs. "Set us free." Ilara's heart raced. She knew what she had to do. She closed her eyes and focused on the whispers, her mind and soul consumed by their stories. The past unfolded before her like a tapestry, each thread a memory, each memory a life. Over the following days, Ilara became obsessed with the box. She opened it day and night, her mind filled with its haunting echoes. The villagers listened in awe and fear, their faces pale with the weight of the box's power. But Ilara didn't care. The past was all that mattered. As she listened to the echoes, she began to notice changes in herself. Her hands were stained with ink, her skin pale and translucent. Her dreams were filled with strange, disjointed images. A figure standing in the corner of the room, a voice whispering her name, a box that trapped echoes of the past. One night, as she listened to the echoes, she heard the voice. It was soft and insidious, barely audible, but it sent a chill down her spine. "Why do you listen?" it asked, its tone filled with a mixture of curiosity and malice. Ilara's heart raced. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The voice didn't respond. Instead, the echoes grew louder, more insistent, until they reached a fever pitch. Ilara felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were reaching into her, pulling at her thoughts and memories. She stumbled back, her hands trembling, and reached for the box. But when she touched it, the room erupted in chaos. The walls shook, the air filled with the sound of screams, and the box's surface rippled like water, its echoes distorting into grotesque shapes. Desperate to escape, Ilar began to search the house for answers. She examined every inch of the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but found nothing. The house was empty, save for the box and the sense of unease that lingered in the air. Then she noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible crack in the floorboards. She knelt down and pried the boards apart, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a journal, its pages yellowed with age and filled with handwritten notes. The journal belonged to the box's previous owner, a historian who had been driven mad by its power. His notes were filled with observations, theories, and warnings. "The box is alive," and he had written. "It feeds on truth, on memories, on the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. To escape, you must confront it. You must face what lies within." Ilara's heart sank. She knew what she had to do. She sat in the center of the house, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, trying to calm her racing heart. The house seemed to pulse around her, its walls closing in, its air growing colder. The voice returned, louder now, more insistent. "Why do you listen?" it demanded, its tone filled with malice. Ilara took a deep breath. "I listen because I must," she replied, her voice steady. "I listen because it is a part of me." The house erupted in a cacophony of sound, voices screaming, walls shaking, the box's surface rippling like water. Ilara felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if something were tearing her apart. But she held her ground, her resolve unwavering. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. The house was silent, the air still and heavy. Ilara opened her eyes and found herself standing in the center of the room, the box in her hands. Its surface was clean, the echoes gone, and its wood shimmered like a pool of water. The box remained in the house, its power dormant once more. Ilara left the village, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had experienced. She knew the box was still there, waiting for the next soul to gaze into its depths. But she also knew that she had faced it, and that was enough. The village was left untouched, its secrets locked away behind the box's haunting echoes. And though the box's power remained a mystery, its legacy endured, a reminder of the choices we make, the fears we face, and the pieces of ourselves we leave behind. For in the end, the box was not just a curse, but a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the courage it takes to confront the unknown.